While everyone will be distracted with today's Fed meeting, we got some massive news coming out of the U.S. Treasury. They have officially targeted Iran for accepting Bitcoin for payments through the Strait of Hormuz. The framing is very interesting. So as we restart the war in the Middle East, Bitcoin is once again at the center of the story. So for everyone that's not really following along on what's going on in the Middle East, it's on, it's off. There's pauses, there's agreements. Trump's always like, Iran wants to negotiate. The IRGC or official spokespeople from Iran are like, actually, I don't know what he's talking about. Well, just to update you a little bit on the updated tensions here that are happening. Here is probably the latest update on where it stands. Just short of it, it looks like it's back on. If you're not following what exactly is going on in the war, maybe you're tired of it. It's been, I think, 152 days now. It was supposed to be over in one weekend. Now we're over 150 days. Yesterday we heard that Iran bombed a military base in Jordan. And what was interesting about this, which does kind of change the scenario here, it was, I believe, the first offensive front from the Iranian regime. Most of this kind of skirmishes were like tit for tat. Iran would only bomb something if the U.S. did. Well, this was the first time throughout this whole time that they went in and, attacked first, or at least that's kind of what it looks like. And now we're getting updates that the U.S. is going to go even harder. So Walter Bloomberg this morning basically summarizing goes, Middle East conflict escalates. Fighting between Iran and the U.S. intensified overnight as Iran launched ballistic missiles at U.S. forces. Again, this was in Jordan. While the U.S. and Saudi Arabia responded with strikes on Iran-backed militaries in Iraq, ending a brief diplomatic pause. Saudi Arabia said it intercepted drones targeting its oil facilities for a second consecutive day. The U.S. said all Iranian missiles aimed at its forces were intercepted. Oil prices jumped nearly 4%, with Brent crude oil rising to around $87, which is essentially the oil prices coming out of Russia. As traders reacted to renewed supply concerns, the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. So this has been one of the ongoing sagas here. Is like, is the strait open? Is it closed? I've seen a lot of you guys in the chat essentially ask, did Iran even get any Bitcoin payments throughout this whole process? Well, throughout the whole process, it seems like the strait was closed. It was opened. It was closed. Last time we talked about it, it seemed like some boats were trying to go through on the southern side of the strait through Oman, controlled waters, or at least that's kind of what it was being framed at. Now, Iran's basically like, no, we control this whole strait. So effectively, it's closed right now, which, as we've been covering, a lot of what we're seeing has to revolve around energy. Prices of oil, right? So with shipping heavily disrupted, while tensions are also rising in the Red Sea after attacks by Iran-backed Houthi rebels. The widening conflicts now spans Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, raising fears of a broader regional war. Markets are increasingly focused on energy security, inflation risk, and the potential economic fallout, while hope for renewed U.S.-Iran peace talks continue to fade. That is obviously just a summary of what we're seeing happen in the Middle East. Now, this update, this one is probably, again, depending on if you listen to the Trump haters, you're like, oh, Trump's just going to, chicken out again, or you are kind of just watching what's going on. And this is probably all fog of war and a part of the strategic strategy going on. This is like the latest announcement, which probably shows you that, one, the war seems to have escalated. Obviously, I think the U.S. really has two choices. It's like escalate to an extreme level, which we've kind of been seeing that be the general trend here, or literally just like completely pull out. They really have no other choices right now. It's either pretty much admit defeat or just go all in. Now, obviously, A lot of people are saying maybe it gets so far as dropping a big N bomb here. Wait, dropping a nuke, dropping a nuke, which we probably won't get to, but it seems like the escalation is happening. But this is pretty crazy. So before I get to why I think this is all connected here, is obviously that it's not just a kinetic war; it is an economic war that we're seeing, and I think a lot of people are missing that concept unless you're listening to Tom Luongo or even Simon Dixon. Anyways, Trump goes, the U.S. will strike Iran in response to Iran's ballistic missile attacks on U.S. targets in Jordan last night. Trump adds, quote, we're going to beat the effing shit out of them and we'll be hitting them hard. They're going to get a beating. So very strong words. Obviously, I think before I get any further, just in the context of all of this, what's happening in the Middle East, because this does set up the context for what we saw the U.S. Treasury do this morning. This morning. There is a trend here where Trump does have this maximalist position, and it is being used as a negotiation tactic. So, this could just be a way to get Iran to the negotiating table. Officially, it seems, again, this is official, that the official view here is that there is, quote, no direct negotiations happening between Iran and the U.S., but that does imply that there is most likely indirect negotiations happening right now. So this could be just Trump doing a maximalist position to get Iran to the negotiating table, trying to scare them into a position. But anyways, the long of it, the war is back on now, and this is, probably the highest escalation we've seen in months. There's been essentially nothing going on. There's been all of these negotiations. There's been a couple of small attacks here and there, but for the most part, the war really hasn't been going on. Hold on. Oh, sorry guys. Sorry, this headphones was stuck under the chair. The war in Iran hasn't really gone on kinetically, like actual fighting here, since February, like March. It basically was like 2 months where there was actual fighting, and obviously the timeline might be a little confused in my head, but for the most part, there hasn't really been much action. It's just been a lot of this negotiations going on. But part of what we're seeing, and I think this is like the main context before I get into the U.S. Treasury story, I think what we really have to acknowledge is when we look back at this time in history, it's going to be a historical moment, because whether the U.S., accomplishes its strategic motives in the Middle East of regime change or no nukes, or even if we withdraw here, what is in fact happening, and again, this does lead into the latest story. I'm not just going to ramble about the war for you guys. It's just giving you a lot of context of where we are and kind of my understanding of what's happening. We are seeing a complete restructuring of the Middle East from here on forward. And obviously in the moment, we aren't going to be able to see the impacts of this. We are seeing that there is going to be a complete change of not only, strategic and diplomatic and trade happenings in the Middle East, but like things are changing in the Middle East. It's never going to be as it was from, say, 2003 to 2023. Like this is going to be a moment where in the future we look back and it's like, oh, this is when things change for the Middle East. And obviously for now, we are still up in the air of whether this is going to be good or not. But this is a historical moment right now that we're kind of seeing unfold. Depends on what side of the aisle you're leaning on. If you're more of like the Tom Luongo 5D chess, and I don't mean to say that derogatory to Tom. I really enjoy Tom. You could say that this was a win, that this was all a way to end the city of London's control through Iran in the Middle East, and the trade rerouting that we're seeing is a benefit to the U.S. If you are more on maybe the anti-Trump, anti-war sentiment, you might be like, look, this might be one of the biggest strategic blunders we've seen since maybe Iraq. It might not be excuse me, that orange monster. It might not be as big of a strategic mistake as Iraq, but these are kind of the two sides. It's like, what we know for a fact is things are going to change in the Middle East. That's without a doubt. Now, I know we touch on this topic a lot, and even if you are watching more of the political conversation, it's like, I know everyone's bored of this conversation, but there is not only economic impact on what we're seeing, but this has, as we've seen, impacted the markets. And of course, this will directly impact you depending on how this resolved in terms of energy, in terms of rising cost of living. You know, things are getting more expensive and then they kind of cool off and then it's kind of going back up. And so we're not going to see the full impact of what is actually happening in the Middle East, probably, you know, at least for a couple of months, depending on what gets resolved. But anyways, enough of that. This is where it gets interesting, and this is where it does connect to Bitcoin, all right? As I've said, as one of the kind of themes that I've mentioned here is that one of the things that we've seen as Bitcoiners throughout this whole war in the Middle East is that Bitcoin has taken a global stage here. One of the underlying conversations or one of the underlying themes throughout this whole thing is that surprisingly, Bitcoin got a you know, center stage on the political and geopolitical and economic conversation. Like, that was one of the surprising things for me is, all right, you know, hey, there's a war in the Middle East, and lo and behold, it's like, wait, how'd Bitcoin get in this conversation? You know, I mentioned in the beginning when this happened in February that I was surprised that Bitcoin didn't drop more when we got this announcement. And then further, I was even more surprised when we started to hear that the IRGC was going to take Bitcoin payments for the Strait of Hormuz. We were like, oh, wow, look, it's almost like Bitcoin is what we thought it was. Yes, maybe you don't like Iran. Maybe you think they're, you know, extremists, whatever. But this is one of the conversations that we've been talking about in Bitcoin for a long time. It is a geopolitical, non-sovereign money, and it is for enemies. And so part of the things that Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time is you kind of have to be comfortable with your worst enemy using Bitcoin. Now, obviously, from an individual perspective, it's like you probably don't have very many issues with anyone in Iran. You might have friends that are Iranian. But from a government level, you see, obviously, where the U.S. is in a war with Iran. So they're enemies. Anyways, this does have to do with the Strait of Hormuz. So here is what the U.S. Treasury dropped this morning. And I do want to kind of highlight maybe the framing here. So press release dropped this morning. The Treasury disrupts Iranian regime Strait of Hormuz extortion network. Again, you know, if you are more pro-America, you know, America first, and you think that what Trump's doing is a good thing and that the Iranian regime has, you know, basically been in a war for 47 years, you know, that's kind of what you hear, then you're looking at what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz and you're like, yeah, it is an extortion network. They are just trying to extort money out of the shipping passages because they need money. How else are you going to fight a war if you don't have money? And as we've seen, the U.S. Treasury has sanctioned some money coming out of, or some of the accounts of the IRGC, in particular, a lot of stablecoins. The Bitcoin sanction aspect of this, I still haven't been able to wrap my head around exactly how they were able to sanction that Bitcoin. I think it was because it was on an exchange or basically from the off-ramps. But if you're on the other side, if you're thinking more, I guess more empathic here, and you're looking from the Iranian view, and maybe you're a little more objective and you just view as people adopting Bitcoin, you're like, yeah, no duh, they would want Bitcoin. Like, yeah, they would want to get paid in Bitcoin. It's the only non-sovereign, non-political money. Anyways, here's the official announcement. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I will just read kind of the portions that mention digital assets and Bitcoin. So today, the U.S. Department of Treasury's OFAC is taking further action against the Iranian regime's desperate efforts to monetize the Strait of Hormuz and prop up the nation's failing economy. OFAC is designating excuse me, designating two firms integral on the IRGC-backed extortion scheme that forces commercial vessels to purchase mandatory maritime, quote, insurance to transit the strait. Although this coverage purports to protect vessels from risks such as seizures, these risks are overwhelmingly created by Iran itself. Through the Persian Gulf Marine Insurance Company and the Hormuz Safe Marine Service Authority, the regime brokers IRGC-approved policy designated to extract revenue under the guise of maritime services, including payments in digital assets to evade sanctions, allowing Iran to tighten control over shipping activity and funnel funds into the IRGC operations. There is an interesting quote here from Scott Bessent, of course, Secretary of the Treasury, and he goes, with its economy in free fall and inflation in triple digits, the regime is desperate for cash. The United States will not allow Iran to hold global commerce hostage or use international shipping to finance the IRGC's terrorism, aggression, and repression. I don't really disagree with the framing here, but it is interesting, you know, like economy in free fall, inflation in triple digits. Now it makes a lot of sense from like a purely ideological Bitcoin perspective why they're using Bitcoin. One, inflation is going out of control. Two, sanctions and basically being cut off from the global economy. And three, a non-sovereign, non-political money, a money that no one controls. Obviously, these are reasons why they chose Bitcoin in the first place, which we've covered on this show a lot. But it does make kind of a point here for, you know, for us in the first world, in the US, for us more comfortable in generally stable economies and generally using stable currencies. This is probably why it's incredibly hard to get your friends and family to understand Bitcoin. But as we've seen throughout the history of Bitcoin, when your country has inflation problems, when you, as an individual or a nation state, get cut off from the global economy, you start to look to alternatives. And of course, you usually end up on Bitcoin. And this is why they're doing this. Now, going further, let me find the portion where they do talk about Bitcoin. Okay, so here we go. The Hormuz Safe is an Iranian digital insurance firm that advertises itself as a company offering trusted maritime services, including insurance, traffic control, security, and emergency response to vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Developed by Iran's Ministry of Economy, it accepts payment in Bitcoin and other digital assets as part of the regime's attempt to bypass Western sanctions. Disgraced regime financier Babak Mortiza Zanjani, who was sanctioned earlier this year, promoted Hormuz Safe to his social media followers. Hormuz Safe generates revenue on behalf of the IRGC in an attempt to give the regime tighter control over shipping activity. So, rehashing the title here, you know, Treasury disrupts Iranian regime Strait of Hormuz extortion network. It does, and this was where I was having a hard time kind of packaging this morning. Reading this, it does seem as if they are sanctioning Iran's Bitcoin. At least that's kind of how it's read. Though that idea, I'm like, how are they even going to do that? Especially if they have, you know, IRGC controlled self-custodial Bitcoin wallets, which I would suppose they have. It's like, okay, how are they actually stopping this? How can you stop Bitcoin, the network, people from transacting on Bitcoin? So that part, you know, this portion of it is, it's a little confusing. Obviously, we don't have too many details on exactly what they're doing here. All we really have is the official report that they are targeting Iran because of the Bitcoin payments, which does lead into the entire conflict we're seeing in the Middle East. It is not just a kinetic war. It is, of course, an economic war. And arguably, most of the war, you know, World War III is happening in generally two very distinct areas. There's obviously the third, which is kinetic. It's physical. There's missiles, etc., and troops and all that. But it really is happening in the digital information age, in the propaganda war, and then two, in the economic side of things with the tariffs, which with the sanctions, which, you know, trying to essentially squeeze Iran so that they come to the negotiating table, trying to, you know, reroute around the Strait of Hormuz, trying to deploy the national petroleum reserves so that the amount of oil that's been stuck in the Strait of Hormuz doesn't really affect many nations. But at the same time, what is very interesting about this is kind of the ideological perspective here, where if you're Iran, and again, you know, I'm not making the case for Iran, the IRGC. You know, I'm not here making the case for what most people would say is like, how's Opti making cover for terrorism and terrorist and rogue regimes? I'm not doing that by any means. But from their perspective, you can see why there hasn't been much negotiation on their side, because literally, if they do not succeed, they are wiped off the map. Like, you know, wait, we're on YouTube. How family friendly do I want? You know, they will be unalived, okay? Like, they are fighting for survival, literal fighting for survival. Hence why you see that they are so entrenched and they really don't trust the U.S. They don't trust the negotiation process. They're like, look, the U.S. has kind of shown that, and again, this is the IRGC perspective. The U.S. has shown that they are not negotiating in good faith, and if they do not literally fight to survive, their regime is completely wiped out. There is a regime change. The people that are heading this will again be unalived, and from the U.S. perspective, it's like, hey, we are in a position right now where if things do escalate and they don't go our way, like, yes, the people in control here in the U.S. aren't going to necessarily be unalived or taken out of their position. There's just going to be a really bad economic situation here. And I think from our perspective in the U.S., it's like, you know, we can deal with a little recession. It's like, we want to win. This is going to be good for us. But there is also the time constraints of the Middle East, or sorry, the midterms. As we know, there is 9 days left until Senate recess, or Congress recess, sorry. And then they take about a month off. When they come back in September, it's like the midterms. The midterm cycle come in. And so there is that time constraint where either the U.S., you know, the Trump administration, the DOJ, the military, they have about two choices here. One, try to calm the tension down enough so that they can not lose out in the midterms. And actually, one of my friends, a good Bitcoiner, I don't want to dox him because I don't know if he said this publicly, but he's convinced we're going to see a red wave in the midterms. I know everyone's been saying, oh, the Dems might get in. He's like, nah, dude. The red wave is going to happen like it happened in 2016. And if that does happen, then obviously kind of calming down the tension in the Middle East does go in favor for a Republican kind of landslide in the midterms. Or, you know, they could try to win this very shortly. But again, I don't think people understand the geography of what's going on in the Middle East, in Iran in particular. It's very mountainous. Like, you can't just go in and invade through the mountains and then we're going to do an amphibious invasion. It's like the geography is really forcing the hand of the U.S. Hence why you're seeing a lot of this maximalist position, this we're going to bomb the F out of them, because they are trying to force them to the table. So if they can get a very quick win here, which I think is less of a chance than them trying to ease the tensions in the Middle East, maybe the midterms don't go as bad, and then we can get back to a lot of the, Clarity Act stuff. The Clarity Act isn't completely over. There's kind of this trend right now that the Dems will do exactly what Patrick Witt said, which is, come to the table at the very last minute to cut the deal. That seems to be the prevailing narrative recently. But anyways, once again, Bitcoin is at the center of the Middle East conflict. And now we're seeing, hey, look, they are targeting these Bitcoin payments. You could stretch it and say that they are targeting Bitcoin, but that's where I was having issues this morning. I'm like, how do I frame this? How do I package this for you guys? It's like, did the U.S. Treasury sanction Bitcoin? It's like, well, the official press release says nothing in terms of necessarily sanctioning Bitcoin. They are just trying to stop the IRGC from skirting Western sanctions. And I think the framing in the headline of disrupting their extortion network is probably the best kind of signal on what is going on here. Can they actually sanction Bitcoin through the actual Bitcoin network? No, that's not how this works. I would argue that this is probably going to target the on and off ramps for the IRGC. I don't know what they're using. Obviously, if I was them, I wouldn't be telling and broadcasting the world on, what exchange I'm using or et cetera, or who my money exchanger is. But it is very interesting that this morning, the economic war angle has just taken another level. And this does bring me back to, and I don't know if I brought this up on the show when we initially heard about the Bitcoin payments in the Strait of Hormuz, but I was very surprised when that news came out that we didn't see this response from the U.S. Treasury quicker. Like, you would think that news came out and instantly they're like, yeah, this isn't going to happen. I think I mentioned it on the show a few times. I was very surprised throughout that process. I'm like, surprisingly very quiet from the U.S. in terms of these Bitcoin payments. Obviously, we heard a couple of points that Trump was saying throughout this whole, PR saga or sound bites from Trump. He's like, yeah, I don't like the payments. But in the very short aftermath, it almost seemed like they were okay with the payments going through the Strait of Hormuz. And now they've completely backtracked on that idea. And they're like, no, not going to happen. We are not going to let the IRGC fund themselves through Bitcoin and other digital assets. He's like, we are going to put on the economic chokehold on the IRGC. And I think that is the signal here, where that is the pressure point going on right now. It's the money. What do we always say? Follow the money. And now we're seeing that is happening from the U.S. Treasury. Again, Operation Epic Fury was the attack. I'm blanking on what was the name of the economic attack. Let me see. Let me look it up. Operation, was it Epic something? Treasury Iran economic. Let's see if it pops up. Oh, yeah, sorry. It was Operation Economic Fury. Okay, so the operation, or the military aspect, was Operation Epic Fury. The Treasury attack on the IRGC's money was Operation Economic Fury. So you're seeing all of this play out. And look, not to necessarily, again, how some people might bring me out of context or put me in out of the unfair context. Is like, what we're seeing here is exactly what Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time. We are in a digital world. Therefore, digital money has a use case that is non-sovereign, hard cap, cannot be debased. And that is for situations like this. So it is very interesting as a Bitcoiner, where I'm looking at everything going on in the world, and also as like an American, wondering exactly, like, is this war good for America? Is this good for me and you as Americans? Yeah, maybe, there's a political agenda that I probably will not benefit from. So there's like two opposing views here. Like, from a Bitcoiner, this makes perfect sense to me. It's like, yeah, I see why the IRGC wants Bitcoin. It is, again, it's what were you, uncensorable, it can't be sanctioned. It is hard cap. It is a good store of value. You can send it peer to peer. Like, it makes perfect sense from the IRGC's perspective to go into Bitcoin. And further, from an, maybe like a patriotic standpoint, you're like, man, this is also not necessarily helping the Bitcoin narrative here. Like, we've already heard Elizabeth Warren say this, where it's like the Clarity Act is helping the IRGC skirt sanctions and use Bitcoin. This will not stop terrorism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've covered this on the show. So, and again, you totally understand from the U.S. Treasury perspective, like a statist perspective, why they would do this. It's like, yeah, of course, you want to stop your enemy from getting money. You cut off the money. You cut off the head of the snake, metaphorically. But again, I think the broader story is just like Bitcoin is at the center of all of this. IRGC moves to Bitcoin in a surprising move to get paid through the Strait of Hormuz fees. Now, it looks like the U.S. Treasury is going to try to find a way to, one, of course, stop those payments from happening, and two, figure out a way to essentially get all the old money that they ever stacked in Bitcoin, which we have seen them do with stablecoins. So it's going to be interesting if we get more information on exactly where the pain points are. Excuse me. And there will be obviously lessons to learn for future geopolitical situations like this. So I'm a bit conflicted here. You know, as an American, I'm like, man, let's hope this is good for the US. From a Bitcoiner's perspective, you're like, I totally get why the IRGC is using money. Further, I don't really understand how the U.S. Treasury is going to sanction and stop their Bitcoin from transacting. To me, that doesn't make sense. But hey, maybe I'm hearing you guys go, that's why big Bitcoin's here. That's why, you know, BlackRock is backing the Clarity Act. It's because it's a surveillance bill. You will own nothing, and we can stop you from using your money. So there's a lot of things happening right now. But again, Middle East war, tensions are on the rise. I think a lot of people always just frame this as it's a military operation. Again, kinetic. It's just troops and missiles. And, you know, it's maybe not as sexy talking about the economic war aspect of this, but Scott Bessent's been doing this for a long time. It's one of the things he's been saying. Well, not a long time, I would say. Since the start of the war, this has been a, you know, 1-2 punch. Military operations and then economic operations. How do you stop the money from flowing? Obviously, I don't know what took them so long from the initial announcement of the Strait of Hormuz fees happening to now them like, okay, we got to stop this. That's what it's been, about a month, 2 months or something like that. So maybe they had to figure out ways of doing this. Maybe they had to investigate where the on and off ramps were, you know, where the money, the Bitcoin is exchanged for either dollars or what's the Iranian rial. So there's a lot of things going on in here. But hey, Bitcoin, once again, at the center of the Middle East war, which is kind of one of the big themes that we've been talking about, or I've been talking about here on the show, is that now Bitcoin is a part of the geopolitical conversation. And it does look, I'm not going to do this time's different, but like, guys, this time is so different. Okay, 4-year cycle is kind of holding out, but we have never in the history of Bitcoin. This almost feels like a WikiLeaks moment. Where in the early days, you know, WikiLeaks used Bitcoin to fund themselves. And that's why Satoshi left, because, you know, WikiLeaks is kicking the hornet's nest. This is almost feeling like a permeation of that, a new evolution of that exact storyline happening. But because Bitcoin is so big, because every institution is embracing Bitcoin, it does seem like the conversation around this news story is like a hush, hush, let's not talk about that, because Wall Street wants to embrace Bitcoin. So I do find that very interesting. But what do we always say? You know, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Not only are we going to be looking back at the Iran-US war in history, in the context of historical moments, and be like, that's the time when everything changed for the Middle East. I think we will also look at this moment in terms of Bitcoin history as one of the big developmental moments of Bitcoin entering the world stage. In terms of like nation states, we have El Salvador doing the first, you know, becoming the first Bitcoin country in the world. And then we have probably, you know, BlackRock embracing Bitcoin, institutions officially getting into Bitcoin. We have Donald Trump coming out and saying he's pro-Bitcoin, Bitcoin superpower of the world. And then we will have Iran trying, you know, being a little more, I guess, maybe cynical, lenient, maybe, trying to use Bitcoin to skirt Western sanctions. Like, these are all the big developments we have seen in the past few years, which we've never seen that before. So at the bottom of a bear market, We're seeing Bitcoin enter not only the geopolitical conversation, but the global economic conversation. We're seeing the institutions come into Bitcoin. We're seeing Bitcoin potentially on the verge of having the least volatile bear market ever. Like, if you would have told me this stuff happened in 2018, I'd be like, yeah, that's going to happen in like 10 years. Close enough, right? 8 years. I guess 8 years rounding up is basically 10 years. So maybe my timeline was a little faster than I expected. But if we were hearing these stories in like the 2018 bear market, that would have instantly got us out of a bear market. Bitcoiners would have been like, look, it's happening, guys. It is totally happening. Now everyone's just like, yeah, whatever. Anyways, wow, I went 35 minutes on this. Anyways, I have an interesting clip here from Fidelity talking about what I've been saying, 60-40 portfolio, 1 to 5%. We're going to cover that. And then I have Jason from Ocean coming in. So I'm guessing we're going to be talking about BIP 110 again. Anyways, later on in the culture, drop some questions. Maybe we'll get a little Q&A here, but I'll be right back. First break. Here's the part that nobody says out loud. Buying Bitcoin on an exchange and leaving it there isn't buying Bitcoin. It's buying an IOU. And the last decade has been a masterclass in what happens when those exchanges don't deliver on their promises.
Bitcoin Well is a self-custody Bitcoin platform. That means that when you buy Bitcoin, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet. You actually own it from the very first transaction. They're available both in the United States and Canada. Pricing is transparent, straightforward, and no nonsense. And if you're buying a larger amount of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Well Infinite gives you concierge-level support through a dedicated executive Bitcoin advisor, premium help for when it actually matters.
You can also stack a little extra through the referral and wishing well rewards. A nice bonus on top of the owning your own Bitcoin thing. So go to bitcoinwell.com/simply and sign up for the Bitcoin Well portal today and buy Bitcoin you actually own. Paper burns, paper floods, paper fades. If your seed phrase is written on paper, it's not really backed up. It's waiting to disappear. Stampseed's DIY kit lets you hammer your seed words directly into commercial grade titanium. Fireproof, crush-proof, waterproof, and permanent. Once your words are in the metal, they aren't going anywhere. Use code SIMPLY at stampseed.com for 15% off anything in the store. That's stampseed.com, code SIMPLY. All right, guys, I'm gonna fly through this. Bitcoin price is currently 63,740. That is a 49.5% discount from all-time high. Who cares about the numbers, right? Just all we care about. No, I'm trolling. Anyways, I saw this clip. It is a little difficult to listen to. She's got a heavy accent, but the signal remains the same, and I'll explain. So let me just play the clip for you guys real quick. And the context is Jason's in here. Okay, popped in early. He popped in early. Let me I'll pull him in, and actually I'll get him to chat with me. I was gonna try to fly through this so before he got here, but anyways, this is from Fidelity. And they're basically making the case that like the 60-40 portfolio no longer works. Just a little bit of Bitcoin saves everyone's portfolio here. So again, the narrative has shifted. Let's play this real quick and then I'll bring Jason in.
Investors are aware of the fact that there is increasing correlation between bond and equities. And naturally, they're looking for alternative asset class that come with low correlation to invest and consider. And Bitcoin could be an interesting one, and as part of the broader asset allocation menu, given it's unique, it's scarce. Obviously, it's one of them with the potential of aspirational store of value. But you can also see there are some unique drivers that drive the Bitcoin price movement.
Yeah.
For example, it's influenced by regulatory development, it's influenced by the adoption, and also the network healthness, so on and so forth. So all these also contribute to the relatively low correlation we observe of Bitcoin versus traditional asset class from equities and bonds and even gold. So I think naturally, so that's a new menu for investors to consider. And if you look into, how about we put a small allocation of Bitcoin towards this traditional portfolio, ranging from, let's say, 1 to 5%. And generally speaking, it's a fact that like over the past 5 years, having a small allocation of Bitcoin did improve the overall risk-adjusted return of the overall portfolio. So that's something investors can consider. And of course, as you increase your allocation to Bitcoin with the higher proportion, and that will also naturally trip some of the maximum drawdown. And that's an area that investors need to really understand where their risk tolerance are and how they could possibly size the right position in their portfolio.
All right. Well, Jason, welcome to the show. You popped in early, so you'll do the first portion of this with me. What is interesting here, and this again for the chat, I know we've heard this before, like we've on this show, and if you're on Bitcoin Twitter and you're a Bitcoiner, this has been one of those ideas that has been probably beating our heads. It's like, look, if you just add a little bit of Bitcoin, you're going to outperform everything. To us, it's like, yeah, duh. Like, of course, but further, when we hear this, you're like 1 to 5%, we got to pump these numbers up. Like, let's go to like 50 to 100% here. Like, what are we even talking about? But again, part of the conversation is 2 years that institutions could get into Bitcoin is really not that much time, considering that a lot of people have time constraints. They have other kind of focuses that they're probably not that focused on Bitcoin. They have this kind of initial view of Bitcoin, it's a scam. I don't want to hold it. And now we're getting to the point where they're like, oh, wait, okay, actually, it's not going away. Yes, it's on a discount. I should probably add a little bit to my portfolio. So even though we've seen this trend of more institutional adoption of Bitcoin, which you may or may not like, it is starting to make headwinds to everyone. And now everyone is going to, at the very least, be considering this. So I know we're like, why don't they just pull the trigger? Well, they move a little slower. Again, other considerations. They're probably chasing AI gains. But this, if we think about this, 1 to 5% of even low numbers of capital markets, that's a couple of trillion that can find its way into Bitcoin. So, guys, I'm not going to say the cavalry is coming here, but it's coming. All right, just hold out. This is like, hey, again, what movie was I watching? Oh, I was watching The Patriot again. I've been on this like American Revolution movie kick, and I'm being reminded of when Mel Gibson's talking to the head, I forget what his name was, and the French general, and they're like, the French are coming, and Mel Gibson's like, okay, when? And he's like 6 months. It's like, oh, okay. So, hey, it's kind of that moment. Anyways, Jason, just quick thoughts on this, because I do want to give a lot of time to have a conversation with you. So, sure. One, do you really even care about the institutions coming? Or further, do you think that they will have a positive impact on the adoption of Bitcoin?
It doesn't make much difference to me. I mean, Bitcoin's going to survive either way. I think the institutions bring a lot of capital to the table, and we can't argue too much with that. What strings are attached to that remain to be seen. So I guess we'll kind of have to feel it out as things progress and then these institutions come online.
Yeah, 100%. I'm totally on board with you on that. I keep joking to the chat. I'm like, look, and really it's always been in terms of the Clarity Act, where I'm like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, can't fool me again. We've heard the institutions are coming and they're going to pump our bags. At this point, I'm like, who cares? Like, whatever, it is what it is. But I wouldn't mind it. That's all I'm saying. I wouldn't mind it, especially maybe it's just bear market things. We thought in 2025, like it was going to go absolutely, to the moon. And it's like, we got a very lackluster bull market. So now I think we all kind of have a little bit of PTSD. We're like, you know what? I'm not going to lay my hat on these hopes. I'm just going to keep stacking and living my life, which is probably the best advice for everyone. Anyways, let's do a commercial break, and then we're going to chat about all things ocean here. Be right back.
I want to give a shout out to our partner, Ledin. Here's something most Bitcoin holders never figure out until it's too late. You're sitting on wealth you can't touch without selling. Ledin fixes that. Bitcoin-backed loans. You keep your stack, you get cash. And they just introduced their lowest rates ever. No complexity, no fine print. The larger the loan, the lower the rate. These new rates apply to all new loans, refinances, and renewals. You'll see all the rates up front before you apply. The new, lower rates come with Ledden's gold standard protection. Your Bitcoin remains custodied and is never lent out for interest. Perfect 8-year track record of keeping clients' assets safe. Auto top-ups, LTV alerts, and partial repayments to keep you in control. Repay whenever you want with zero penalties or monthly payments. Ledden's perfect $10 billion track record through every market cycle in the last 8 years speaks for itself. Don't choose between a great rate and the safety of your Bitcoin. Get both at Ledden. If you ever thought, what happens to my Bitcoin if something happens to me? Or what happens if I lose my phone? You're not alone. For a lot of people, the biggest barrier to self-custody isn't buying Bitcoin. It's the fear of making a mistake. And that's why I like Bitkey and I recommend it to my friends and family. Bitkey is a Bitcoin wallet built for real life, not just for day one, but for everything that happens in between. Lost devices, upgrades, accidents, and long-term ownership. There's no seed phrase to write down and worry about losing, and no single point of failure that can lock you out of your Bitcoin forever. What really stands out about Bitkey is the peace of mind. Recovery is built in, inheritance is built in. It's a complete self-custody system built by the team behind Square and Cash App, designed to make holding your own Bitcoin simpler and safer. Take self-custody of your Bitcoin today using Bitkey. Go to bitkey.world and use promo code SIMPLY for 10% off your new Bitkey. That's bitkey.world, promo code SIMPLY. I want to give a shout out to our partner, HIVE Digital Technologies. Fueled by clean energy across 3 continents, HIVE runs dual engines, Bitcoin mining and AI compute. Their AI platform is ranked #1 in the world for network performance, and it's doing something bigger than compute. It's accelerating human discovery, the science, the breakthroughs, pushing humanity further and faster. Listed on the NASDAQ with the ticker HIVE. Catch the latest buzz at HIVE Digital Tech on X or hivedigitaltech.com. You secured your Bitcoin, but did you secure your devices too? They're still broadcasting your location and digital footprint. GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell, 5G, EMF, all of it is leaking. Escape Zone fixes that. Their Faraday bags block every signal your device emits, so you decide when you're detectable, not the grid. Built for Bitcoiners who know sovereignty isn't just your wallet. It's your phone, your hardware wallet, your keys, and your entire digital life. Go to escapezone.com/simply and use code SIMPLY for 10% off. That's escapezone.com/simply, code SIMPLY. All right, Jason, we're back. Sorry, I backed up the commercial so that we could just keep a conversation flowing. So, Jason,
Works for me.
You do development at Ocean. What exactly does that mean, so the audience can get a grasp of what you do over at Ocean?
Yeah, so my title is VP of Development and Engineering over at Ocean. So I basically make sure that the backend is running so that when you connect miners to Ocean, everything works. I've written a lot of the software that runs that backend, such as Tides and Datum, and just basically keep everything running along with my team in DevOps.
Got it. Okay, cool. I'm guessing the chat wants to talk about BIP 110 a little bit. Is that what you want to chat about? Or do you just want to talk about Ocean in general? Like, I can take the combo wherever you would like. So what do you have top of mind? What do you want to get across on today's show? And we could just kind of flush these ideas out.
No, we can kind of do both.
Okay.
I'll just note for completeness that my opinions on BIP 110 are not Ocean's. So just
okay. All right. I like that. I like that. Okay. All right. Let's get your opinions on BIP 110, because the audience has been, actually our audience is kind of split. We have a lot of pro BIP 110, against BIP 110 in the chat. And what we've been trying to do is obviously get people from both sides to talk about it. So what's your view on this? And then we can kind of chat about just the general work that you're doing at Ocean.
So, I mean, I'm neither against nor for, and I've made that pretty clear, I hope. If not, there you go. I'm more of the enabler. If you want to be pro BIP 110, I want you to be able to do that. If you want to be against BIP 110, I want you to also be able to do that. It's one of the reasons that I made Datum, so that miners can be sovereign and make these decisions for themselves. and it's not up to me. It's up to the miners what they want to mine, and it's up to the network what they want to run as nodes. That's not my decision. If BIP 110 were to activate and everything went smoothly, I'd be okay with that. If it fails, I'm also okay with that. So that's pretty much where I am with BIP 110. I won't make any predictions either way. I think the numbers speak for themselves on that. The main thing that I've been working on lately is, as Ocean announced, is making it so that miners that are using Datum can mine on BIP 110 or non-BIP 110 and be rewarded accordingly, regardless of how the network behaves after that the mandatory signaling block. So that's been my primary focus over the last couple of weeks, and that's coming into production soon over at Ocean.
Awesome. Yeah, we had Mark on the day after you guys announced the launching of the 2 additional Stratum endpoints, and we kind of found it. And Nico was like crashing out. It was like, dude, they're giving you the option.
Yep.
And then I did, while Mining Disrupt just happened, and I did go to the Ocean party, which was super cool. And I was talking to Ian and Mark, and we were just kind of chatting about just the general PR reception of that story, and we found it very interesting, the just like the pushback you got. But in like the conversations, it was just like, yeah, no, what you just said, it's like, no, we're just giving you the option. And the entire community was like, you're forcing this on us. And we're like, you're literally the only pool giving the option. Like you said, it's like, look, do what you want to do. We are giving you the option. Exactly. We're the only ones that give you the option. And it was just kind of incredible how much, flack you guys got for it on Twitter. It was kind of insane.
Yeah, I think a lot of the flack wasn't so much the option being available, but was also that the default was changing to BIP 110.
Yeah.
As a pool operator, I mean, if you delegate that sovereignty to the pool using an SV1 endpoint, it is up to the pool what template that is. We tried to make that as reasonable of a choice as possible, so that there's both endpoints, and the default reflected what at the time was the majority of the datum hash rate. Over a certain period, we kind of all had some loose triggers on when we figured we would change that if there was enough signaling, and in my opinion, that threshold was crossed, so it was time to switch the default to that, and we did. But that doesn't mean you're forced to do that. You can use either endpoint, or you could have even before then just use datum to mine whatever block you want. So no one was forcing anything. I think that was a little bit of FUD that was kind of thrown around, but publicity is publicity, I guess, in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our job here is social media and then being talking heads about it, but it is very interesting just how I think hyperbolic a lot of the conversation has gotten. There's on the one side, it's like Bitcoin's going to die if it doesn't. On the other side, it's like, no, it's not, like you're an idiot. And then they're like, you're the idiot. Like, it's just like we've gotten to the point now where it's the classic, I forget what they call it, but when an argument goes on long enough, everyone just starts hurling insults at each other. And it's like us that watch, are trying to make everything going on. We're like, I don't know. I'm lost in this conversation. And I think that's part of what is going on. Like there is a lot of confusion, and, you can pick sides and think that one side has more nefarious intentions versus the other and vice versa. But I think a lot of people are just like, generally confused about what's going on, and maybe they're just like taking the sound bites that sound really good for the conversation and they're running with it, and then everyone is just entrenched in their position, and literally like you said, from your perspective as like just the Ocean developer, you're like, no, I'm giving you the option, guys.
Exactly.
Like I want
it's
you.
Not, I don't want it to be my choice. I don't want it to be Foundry's choice. I don't want it to be Antpool's choice. I want it to be the miner's choices, what they mine. And I'll be the first to admit, like when some of these changes started coming along, initially, I guess well over a year ago now, I was on the existential death of Bitcoin side for a little while before I kind of stepped back and refocused. Then I'm like, okay, this is a problem, but is it really that big of a problem? I don't necessarily subscribe to either camp on that. So, I mean, I was wrong about that, and I've posted that as well. So, And regarding the confusion, I think that's the biggest problem. And from my perspective, the confusion with miners in how this will proceed as somebody mining on a pool or mining with Datum or solo mining in another way, how this will play out will affect you as a miner. And there's a lot of things been thrown around. Like some people think BIP 110 is, it's inevitable. It's going to happen no matter what. The miners have to do it. I don't subscribe to that. The miners don't have to do anything, and they can kind of do whatever they want, and they have to follow the network. And if the network continues to allow them to do whatever they're doing, then that's what's going to continue. But you're right. I think a lot of it is kind of devolved into it's almost political or religious at this point.
Yeah.
And that kills the conversation. So I try to stay on the fence, as bad as that sounds, and try to just kind of keep the logical perspective on it and just look at the data, point things out, make things work, and just keep giving people the choice of what they want to do.
Yeah, no, and wait, Jason, I just connected the dots here. I saw you made I think, depending on which side of the aisle you are on, a very contentious article on Twitter that
both sides hated it, so I was successful.
Yeah, so here, let me just pull up for people that want to search for this. Could you maybe like a short summary of what this article was saying? Because you really reminded me when you're like, wait, I was on the existential it's gonna die side, and then I've kind of come back, and I was like, oh wait, like Jason, you did this article, and like you said, everyone hated you for it. So I guess
Exactly.
It was a good job.
Yeah, and like I said, if both sides hate you for something, you've done it right. So I think I got a lot of hate from the BIP 110 supporters, a lot of hate from the anti-BIP 110 people, and then the people that were kind of in the middle and just looking at it and trying to figure out what was going on, looked at it and was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But basically, I was writing kind of an article and a document for miners to kind of understand how things can progress in the various scenarios with BIP 110's activation, or rather, not activation to be precise, the mandatory signaling period, and how that can affect miners, their rewards, and whatnot, and so they could be ready for it succeeding or not succeeding and making that decision for themselves. I don't think that information was really out there in a as unbiased a way as possible. I think my writing style with a little bit of sarcasm kind of rubs some people the wrong way. And okay, I'll eat that. But that's just how I write stuff like that. But I think I got my points across pretty well, and it seemed to be well received by the people who needed to see it, and that was the mining community.
Yeah, and guys, I just dropped it in the YouTube and Rumble chat. So if you guys want to follow or actually go read this, or go to Jason's Twitter, which is WK057, read the article. It was really good. And again, like when it came out, it was like it made a huge splash. There's people like, good job, thank you for this. Other people like, you abandoned us, bro. And it was like, oh man, he's trying to do good for the community, and you get hate on from all sides. It's just incredible.
That is what it is. I think again, the information speaks for itself, and that's the side that I'm on. I just want to make sure that people are informed as well as they can be, and when you get information from one side or the other, one side's going to tell you, oh, you have to do this, it's an upgrade, you absolutely have to do this no matter what, or you're going to be insecure, or you're whatever, or you have to not upgrade because this is never going to happen, or whatever the case may be, or you're going to lock up your funds, or a whole bunch of different arguments against BIP 110, a lot of which don't make any sense. But either way, I mean, though, you don't want your information to come from either one of those sides, unless you're in a position to be able to understand it fully and digest it. You don't want to be like just pulled into one of those camps. You want the plain information and do with it what you need to.
Yeah, 100%. And I am going to kind of start moving the conversation towards Ocean and what you're doing and the actual goals. But I think one of the things that I took away the most from this, and I think a lot of people, or from your article in particular, and I think a lot of people maybe have this wrong perception of Ocean. And I think I think it was in this article, or maybe it was in one of your tweet threads, where you were like, yeah, look, Luke is one of the faces of Ocean, obviously huge proponent of BIP 110. He's like, but like within our company, we have our autonomy. It's like, I can disagree with Luke, and some of us at Ocean are pro BIP 110, and some of us aren't, as hardcore about it. And that's like one of the things that I think a lot of people I think that there's misrepresentation that every single person that works at Ocean has, like, you know, dictator Luke, you know, the king that people are saying, like, Luke is the king and what says goes. And I think that was one of those points in that article. Or I forget if it was one of your threads where I was like,
I followed up on it.
Yeah, I think it was a follow-up, and I thought that was probably the most interesting, because we got something similar here. Like, people were like, how come Simply Bitcoin isn't pro BIP 110? And then one of our content creators did like a very favorable BIP 110 video, and then like, wait, Simply Bitcoin's now entirely pro BIP 110.
Exactly.
And we're like, no, literally every one of our content creators, we disagree off air, on air. It's like, we don't have a editorial mandate here where it's like, all right, you got to go BIP 110. We want to just foster the conversation. And I found that super interesting, because I think I had that misperception from the beginning as well. It's like, oh, I thought everyone there is pro BIP 110. You know, Luke's ahead of it, you know, in charge. He's kind of the face of the company. And, you know, having someone on the inside be like, no, look, we disagree here too. We're Bitcoiners after all.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the great things about working at Ocean is we can have those disagreements both internally and sometimes publicly when it comes to it, and still keep working together at the end of the day. I mean, it's not going to end the company. It's not like people were calling for me to be fired over posting something against what they perceived was the position of Ocean. I'm like, no, I mean, that's I Luke himself, and I appreciate him for it, even told me, like, you can post whatever you want. I don't necessarily want you to, but you can do what you want, and that's just kind of how it goes. And I appreciate that a lot. But yeah, I mean, Ocean is definitely not unanimous on this. Ocean has a board. The board has a position. The employees have positions. I kind of stayed out of it on the public side for quite some time with the BIP 110 stuff, just kind of hoping for a little more direction from Ocean on it, which I think came kind of late, in my opinion. But it's there now. I think everything's kind of set, and making it so Ocean works regardless of what happens with BIP 110, I think, is the goal.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Now we got all the, you know, what everyone wants to talk about out of the way. Let's talk about Ocean in general. And every time I look at your guys' website, like, I love just the initial tag here, you know, take control of your Bitcoin mining and make more money. And then the subtitle, the industry's lowest fees and most transparent payouts. Mm-hmm. Like, people forget there's literally only one pool that does this. And you guys get a lot of shit for it, for just giving the miners optionality. So can we just start with like the mission statement of Ocean and how this could benefit the miners out there if they're somehow not aware of what you guys are doing?
I mean, Ocean exists to help decentralize Bitcoin mining and to help the broader Bitcoin network. And I think we've been making steps towards that since launch. I mean, since not day one, but since very soon after launch, we were the only pool to provide optionality on templates at all. And then with the launch of Datum, we give miners effectively full autonomy into what they put into their blocks while maintaining a pooled mining setup. So it's also not a custodial pool. Everybody, when an Ocean block is mined, you can look at any Ocean block, it pays the miners directly. Like, Ocean doesn't get that money to pay the miners. You mine the block, the money's yours, and it matures just like as if you had mined it yourself, except it's your fraction with the pool. And nobody does that. When Foundry mines a block, they pay their own wallet, and then they eventually pay everyone else, and that's how every other pool operates except for Ocean. And with Datum, we have the way where you're actually mining the block, and when you find the block, you submit it to the network yourself. And before you do that, you can look in your dashboard for Datum and see who is getting paid. So which miners is your block going to pay? Am I in there? Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm there. You can know that before you even turn on your miner. And that's not something that anybody provides at the moment. I think there's been a lot of push for decentralization over the years, but nothing's ever materialized until Ocean actually made it a thing. And I'm pretty proud of that. We've mined over 1,000 Datum blocks. We just reached that milestone not that long ago, and that wasn't a thing before. Before, it was just a few pools making templates and submitting the blocks, and the miners were pretty much blinded to that information. So now you can know kind of what you're mining because you're making the template yourself. And yeah, I mean, it's just been great. So that's kind of the mission, is to improve that decentralization, move more of that authority back to the people actually running the equipment and in the trenches, and getting all of the equipment online, running the power, and doing all the work to make that so that they can be a true miner instead of just kind of a mercenary selling hash rate.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of questions here. Like I'm
Let's go.
thinking from the audience perspective here. So someone that's not that familiar with how Bitcoin mining works, like at scale, you keep mentioning this, and I understand it, but for the people that don't, you keep mentioning this, that miners get to pick what transactions get into the block. Could you explain for people that maybe are newer to Bitcoin, maybe never did any Bitcoin mining, or just don't know how it works? Like, what is the status quo right now for, you know, pooled Bitcoin mining? And like you just said, you know, you're not just a rented mercenary for your hash. It's like you're actually mining here. Could you explain that a little bit for the people that are still like, what are we even talking about here? Like, what is the big revolutionary idea here?
Well, let's ignore Ocean for the moment and then work backwards from kind of prior to Ocean launch. Then it seems like the best way. Before Ocean launched, you had a handful of pools. And if you had a mining hardware like an Antminer or a WhatsMiner or a Bidax or whatever, the way you would mine generally is you would set that up to aim at one of these pools like Foundry or Antpooler and whatnot. And when you did that, those pools are talking to the actual Bitcoin network, finding the transactions to include in blocks, deciding which transactions to include, to exclude if they want to. Some pools got caught doing that, and basically determining the makeup of what is mined. As the miner, your hardware has no insight into that. The only thing your hardware can see is who's getting paid by that block when it's mined. And when you point that at one of these bigger pools, it's because it's going to pay that pool. And then you're trusting that pool to pay you your fair share for what you contributed to that block. And that's generally been FPPS over the latest decade or so. And it's a custodial system where the money goes to the pool. The pool decides how much work you've did based on how much work your miner has done, and then pays you accordingly. You're kind of trusting the pool to get that right. And that's not a very Bitcoin thing. It's very anti-Bitcoin to put that kind of trust in another entity. We're trust we do verification ourselves, and that's not something you can do in that space. If you rewind way earlier to kind of the origin of Bitcoin itself and mining, the way you would mine is you would have your own node, and you would generate your own blocks with your CPU, and you would just turn on your node to do that. And at some point you would mine a block that included transactions that your node was aware of in that block, and would reward your wallet 50 Bitcoin at the time. And your node, Decentralized, was doing that, and there were no pools. And then the pools started coming online as a way to mitigate the variance that came with that, because as more miners came online, the difficulty goes up. It becomes harder to find a block, to the point where most mining hardware today will never find a block. Like 99% of the Bidaxes out there will never find a block. Most of the Antminers and WhatsMiners will never find a block. You have to pool the resources together in order to lower that variance if you don't have the monetary buffer to afford to go it alone. And with now with Ocean, we have that set up so that as you make the block yourself with your own node, kind of as it was 15 years ago, your node is making the block, your miners are getting that information from your own node, and then Ocean, the only thing it's doing is coordinating which other miners have also contributed to the payout, so that you know what to put in your block for who to pay, and they know to pay you as well. Then that's all verifiable. It's all transparent. It's all right on the blockchain, kind of as intended from the beginning. And no one else does that. So hopefully that's a good state of things, and hopefully that was pretty clear.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense to me. This is where my second question was going is, you know, Ocean's been out for about a year. Obviously, you guys are very well known.
3.
Oh yeah, sorry. I always think a year. I always think a year for some reason. I literally did this same thing with Ian and Mark. I'm like, wait, you guys have been out for like a year? He's like, no, dude, 3. I'm like, oh man, all right, my bad. It just then working in media is like, it's just one big blur. All right, correction, 3 years here. Anyone in, I would say, most likely in Bitcoin if they're following along on the conversation, but of course in the Bitcoin mining space. And like you said, you're the only ones that are doing this. So my next question, again, you don't have to, you know, you could plead the fifth, etc. But from your conversations, are you seeing that other pools are starting to lean towards your direction? Like, how is, and I don't know if adoption is the right word for this, but how is what Ocean is doing being perceived and maybe even, again, adopted from other mining pools? Or are they just like stuck in their ways?
I think there's a few facets to that. So
Okay.
in my opinion, most of the pools don't have much incentive to do this,
Okay.
to do what Ocean's doing. Ocean's mission is the decentralized Bitcoin mining, and that's kind of the core of it. With the other pools, because of the way FPPS works, and the way that custodial arrangement works, they kind of end up making it more than what you perceive as the fee. So if they charge you X% fees, if you work it out to what you would have made on Ocean or mining completely alone over the same period of time, if you extend that out, you would have made more, even after accounting for the fee. And that's generally the case. It's not always the case, but it's generally the case. So it doesn't, the pools don't get much incentive to kind of relinquish that control. And unfortunately, a lot of miners aren't pressuring them to do so, because it is a pretty easy setup. You have to admit. I mean, it's always simpler to go the trusted custodial route than it is to do it decentralized and do it what I would consider with Bitcoin the right way. It's always a little more complicated. One of the hurdles we have with onboarding miners to use Datum is it is a bit of a jump in difficulty on the technical side to be able to set that up and be able to mine on your own node and whatnot, because historically over the last more than a decade now, you would just plug in your miner and point it at a pool, and we're asking you to do more. So the good thing about that is when we ask you to do more, you get more back, because we're not sitting in the middle between you and the Bitcoin. The Bitcoin's going directly to you, and you see exactly what Ocean gets out of that as well. So it's all very transparent. And with the other pools, it's a black box. If you compare, you would think that FPPS would be pretty standard, but if you compare the payouts from all of the FPPS pools, they never match. For the same amount of hash rate, you never get the same thing from any of the pools. Why is that? It's just because you don't know what exactly they're doing on the background, and you can't know, and that's a problem to me. So I don't see them having a lot of incentive, and unfortunately, getting the miners to pressure them to do so is probably more difficult than just getting them to move to Ocean. Because if Ocean had more than 51% of the hash rate, we still have no control over what is mined. So there's no risk of attack there, because we aren't the miner. Ocean is not the miner, whereas the centralized pools are the actual template creators. They are the miner. They're just buying hash rate from people for FPPS. So in the situation where Ocean was 100% of the network's still secure, and that's a pretty different thing versus what's actually going on in the world of mining now.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, because I can already hear the the histrionics here. If Ocean did get 51%, it's like, no, oh no, like Luke's taking over the network, and you're like, no, dude, you don't know how this works. That's not even the case.
It's actually even a little more of an issue, especially, I mean, we're going to circle back to the BIP 110 side of things here, but like, we have no control over our miners who are mining with Datum, what node they're going to run. So we can't decide for them, even if there's a clear outcome that we think is the way to go as the pool. We can't decide to tell them, we can't make them mine BIP 110 or not BIP 110. So it's interesting, whereas another pool, another non-Ocean pool, can just make that decision for all of their miners just like that. We can't. It's actually way more tedious. We have to reach out to miners that we know, but we don't really know, because they are just a Bitcoin address to us. It ends up being pretty tricky, and we're basically running a pool on hard mode for the betterment of Bitcoin.
Isn't that always the case? I do kind of want to go back to the mission statement here of keeping Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin in general decentralized, and that obviously presumes that either the direction that Bitcoin is headed or is currently in is more centralized than most people probably believe it is. And of course, the inherent threats of what that means down the pipeline. And I do want to add in here we've seen hash rate kind of fall off the cliff here. So like, where is the, I guess generally from your perspective, where is Bitcoin in terms of decentralization? And is this the real existential threat that I think a lot of people may be missing throughout this whole conversation?
Yeah, I mean, right now mining is still quite centralized. That is one of the biggest risks to Bitcoin as a whole is the mining centralization. Like right now, you could, if you can coerce two specific entities, possibly even two specific humans, you can censor things on the Bitcoin network if you wanted to. That's a problem. That's not how Bitcoin was designed to operate. We should never have that dynamic where the censorship resistance aspect of Bitcoin is threatened by just a couple of entities. It should never even be possible for a state actor or a handful of people to have that kind of control. And I think we've made at Ocean, I think we've made significant progress towards solving that problem. I mean, we've grown from nothing to over 30 exahash. We hit 40 the other day. I mean, that's a reasonable percentage of the network. And that hash rate's coming from somewhere. So people are realizing that this is a thing. I don't know if it's going to be solved fast enough for there to not be something adverse that comes out of this centralized way that mining is now. I hope that never occurs, but if it does, at least that would be a wake-up call to people like, hey, this is an actual problem. Maybe we need to do something about it. And we already have one solution. Hopefully others jump on and do the same. So far, the only couple of entities I've seen that have adopted like the Datum server side have been some smaller pools that have been kind of just tinkering with it and whatnot. But it's interesting that they've done that. Again, I don't think a lot of the centralized pools have a lot of incentive to do that at the moment, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that changes as people get closer to the network. And I always call it when you're mining with your own node and such, you're getting closer to the network than you were before. And the closest you can be to the network is to mine your own blocks, self-custody your own Bitcoin, and that's the way it should be with a fully decentralized network. And there's not enough of that still.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I'm not a miner. I'm just a Bitcoin talking head here. But
why not? Why aren't you a miner?
Dude, I live in an apartment. I'm like, I can't plug in a
get a BitX. They use like 15 watts.
Yeah, but I'm like, well, man, I'm better off just buying some Bitcoin. And but anyway,
that is a funny thing. Yeah.
Yeah. We do have a question here, and I think I know this answer, but I'll just tee it up to you. BTC
Sure.
Believer. So he goes, so can I just connect my BitX to Ocean's network?
You can still use our Stratum V1 servers if you don't want to run a Datum server for yourself. You can connect directly to mine.ocean.xyz on port 3334. Put in your Bitcoin address that you want payments to as your username, and you'll be mining on Ocean with any miner, basically, including the BitX. I would suggest that if you do that, you enable Lightning on the Ocean website. So make sure you use a wallet that supports signed messages so that you can enable Lightning, because again, Ocean's permissionless and non-custodial. So the only way we have to verify that you are you is with a signed message, so that when you set up Lightning and things like that, that's the only way to do it. But then you can actually get regular payments over Lightning. If you have a larger miner, you can get pretty regular payments direct from the blockchain. So yes, you can do that, but even a lot of BitX miners still run Datum on like a home server and whatnot. If you have something like one of the Start9 machines or just a small machine that you can run a node on, then you can run Datum and just mine your own templates as well. So you can get as close to the network as you possibly can with any miner.
Okay, awesome. I would like to open it up to the chat, but I just realized kind of the timing here. I don't want to take up too much time for you. But is there any other last words? I usually give the audience the guests, last words. Could be about anything, could be about Bitcoin, life, mining with Ocean, however you want to end this. Is there anything more that you'd like to cover before we wrap up today's show?
Well, I didn't really have a speech or anything prepared, but I think if there's something to take away from what Ocean's done and what it's trying to do, I think one thing that most people can agree on is that Bitcoin as a whole is better with Ocean, with the ideals of Ocean, as far as pushing for decentralization and pushing for more miner sovereignty, more user sovereignty. I think that's something that we all should be striving for. I think that's lost on a lot of the larger pools, and the larger entities in the space have kind of gotten away from that broader picture of this is a decentralized currency. This is a decentralized asset. It's a blockchain. It's something that's made to be permissionless, and a lot of that has kind of taken a back burner to some of the big players, and that's unfortunate. I think we need to kind of, I mean, to be cliche, get back to our roots and with the Bitcoin side of things, and do things in a more decentralized way. And I'm glad that myself and Ocean as a whole are being a big part of that push.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, it's just very interesting the amount of backlash that Ocean has gotten for the work you guys have been doing, which I also think is very important. And again, it's like you're just giving the miners the option, and you're like the big bad boogeyman for just allowing the option to happen. It's like, wait, I thought we liked options here. But hold on, before I go, I did see this question. Where can I go to learn more about the template? Just go to ocean.xyz, and if you hit documentation, there's how-to guides and stuff, and it'll teach you guys a little more. So yeah, Jason, on that note, let's plug your Twitter one more time. And if people reach out to you? Do you like people DMing you? I know I hate people DMing me. So if you liked what Jason's saying, is there anything, actually, maybe another way, is there another like podcast where it's a long form, more of this conversation, or will they just have to rewind?
I don't do a whole lot of podcasts, so there's not a lot of that.
You're stuck with us, guys.
I'm stuck with you. And my Twitter is WK057, and you're welcome to DM me. I do try to answer people when I see the DMs. I don't always have the time to do so, so please don't be offended if I don't. I don't mind answering questions and DMs and whatnot, so that's perfectly fine. Yeah, I don't know what else to add to that. So
perfect. Yeah, I it's a running joke here. I'm like, guys, don't DM me, because like I barely answer like my text messages to my mom here. So like, please don't DM me. But yeah, guys, go check out ocean.xyz. Rewind this conversation of Jason explaining not only the work of Ocean, what they're doing, his take on the BIP 110. Actually, let me plug this your article again real quick. Where did it go? Here. Okay, guys. So go to his Twitter account at WK057 and search for BIP 110, My Notes to Miners. If you want to hear his thoughts and kind of the evolution of his thinking, go read this, guys. I think this was honestly one of the best things that I've read recently that like really started to put everything in its proper context. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, my first principle is my initial thinking is very closely aligned to what you wrote in this article, and it was really just making me feel better. I'm like, okay, I'm not as dumb as I think I am. So again, guys, go to WK057 and check out his article, BIP 110, My Notes to Miners. Really good article. All right, Jason. Well, thank you so much for coming. The audience actually really liked this, so
we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again. Maybe. Yeah, maybe in August, after kind of things maybe calm down a little bit, or we get
Sounds
some
like
definitive actions and reactions that happen. We'll have to bring you back on. But really appreciate it, Jason. That was a very good conversation. At least for me. Again, not a miner, just a Bitcoiner. I know all my miner friends yell at me like, "Why don't you mine?" I'm like, dude. All right, the real reason, I'm just too lazy. All right, I'm just too lazy. I think that's probably, if I'm being honest with myself, that's probably the reason. Anyways, Jason, have a good rest of your day. Really appreciate it
as well.
All right, guys. Yeah, no, that was great. Okay, guys, you already know the deal. We go live 12:40 p.m. Monday through Friday. I know it says 12:16, but you know, I'm working up to the bell. I'm working up to the buzzer here. I'm not just sitting here always not doing anything. Today I was late. I didn't have enough caffeine this morning. I've been trying to drink less caffeine in the morning. It's not working. So I had to go run and get an orange monster so that I'm geeked out on the show. Sorry, guys. I'll drink, enough caffeine to kill an elephant so that I come on here and you guys yell at me for yelling. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about my heart. It won't explode. It's fine. All right. Anyways, 2 more shows for Simply Bitcoin Live for this week. Of course, go check out our other content creators on our channel, Rustin, Dante, Hurley. Selfie's back on the, back on the grind. We love you guys. Anyways, on that note, you already know the deal. We are ascending in 2026. So get your body moving, start eating good, get some sun on your face first thing in the morning. What else do I say? Call your loved ones, maintain your relationships. Actually, PSA, in the midst of all the controversies we've seen and the amount of fallouts between Bitcoiners, let's have a re-emphasis on our relationships here. Not only your friends and family, but your Bitcoin friends and family, okay? And of course, continue to buy some Bitcoin and take it into cold storage. On that note, guys, I'll see you tomorrow. I think I have a guest tomorrow, but I forget. Anyways, peace out. Have a good one.
Today's episode was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, a Bitcoin-only platform on a mission to enable financial independence.